What do you think about drones?
Drones are sexy. Definitely. Oh yeah.
Hey guys, I'm Justin Davis from Drone Camps RC. First, before we get started with this part 2 edition of the build for the QAV-R 180, this is the 4-inch edition. I want to say a special thanks going out to GetFpv.com and Lumenier for supplying this gear for our build video. We're going to have a lot of fun building this for you guys. So we're going to take this step by step. And what we're going to do first, we're going to get into this frame. We're going to build up this X frame with the hardware that they provide. And all the hardware is really nice. All of it is metal, by the way, except for the plastic standoffs for the flight controller. We already went through the spread here that we have. We did that unboxing for you in part 1. Be sure to check that out. But let's go ahead and get started now. Show you how this bottom of the frame builds out. And then we're going to work with the Atlas PDB on top of that and go from there. So we'll put our ESCs on, the motors, and we'll build up all the way up to the camera and get the flight controller all situated. We are going to do a pinless setup on this. We're not going to use the pins on the flight controller. We're just going to solder straight to it. It's going to make a little bit cleaner build, and it's going to give us a lot more room. I already prepped the ESCs and they are ready to go as well. So we're going to try to save a little bit of room on this build, make it as compact as we possibly can. So let's go ahead now and get started on the bottom of the frame, and we'll show you how that hardware goes on there for yours. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with step 1 of putting the bottom of this frame together. There are some pieces of hardware that came in your box. These are metal, by the way, as shown by some other guys. That's really nice that these are metal. Some of these cheaper kits generally have like a sort of industrial plastic fasteners, so this is a really high quality frame. There are 12 bolts and pieces of hardware that we're going to put on this and put together to secure these arms in the center. And these pieces, the smaller pieces here, have a little taller end on them, as you can see here. That's going to go on facing in around the frame. So as they go on, each one of them will face in, that taller end facing in. That will hold on your power distribution board when we're ready to do that. So we'll put our Atlas right there on top of those, and it'll install right there. So I'm going to go ahead and set this bottom plate to the side. You can see the X there, the X frame. A lot of guys have been saying that this X frame really does turn quite a bit different than an H frame. Some guys at the field asking me if I've flown these yet. I haven't, so this is my first X frame. I'm kind of late to the game getting into X frame flying, but I hear really good things about it, so I'm kind of excited about flying one. So I'm going to go ahead, take this first piece, and I'm going to set this right on top. Like I said, you want to have this taller part facing in toward the inside, and then we're going to mount the Atlas to the top of that later. So it is the longer screws that you're going to use on this particular part. So you go ahead and punch those through. Put it through the bottom of your frame. Set this bracket right on top of there. Use your driver to go ahead and tighten that up. Don't tighten it up all the way because you've got another bolt that's going to go through there. And I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these done, and I'll see you in a moment. By the way, I did want to mention that we're going to use some thread locker on the bottom of this frame. Wherever you have a metal to metal connection, if you don't want it to come apart in flight, go ahead and take a little dab of thread lock, put it on there, dab it off with your fingers because you don't need big globs of it on there. But you just want to have some on that, so when it goes up through this other metal connection, that it doesn't vibrate off, because it will vibrate out possibly. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these arms, and I'll see you in just a sec. Okay, so I have all these outside brackets installed, and I have the taller edge of those brackets facing inward for the PDB. We're going to install right on top of that later. Now I'm going to go ahead and take this X bracket, install that right in the center, and help strengthen these outside arms just a little more. Some of the guys are actually installing these arms up on the inside of the frame. It just depends on you, how you want to do your frame, but I'm going to do mine on the bottom side, like Lumenier suggested for this build. So next, I'll go ahead, take these last 4 remaining screws, put a little Loctite on them, and bring them up through the frame into this final X bracket. Okay, so now we have the PDB on there, and we tinned each of the pads, positive and negative, for our ESCs to run up and solder to. We're going to route some of these wires underneath here to try to make it a little cleaner looking and hide some of the wires from the external edges of the frame. And we're going to have our battery terminals going to come off the backside back here, and we have our ESCs taped down in the general area that we want, where the wires are going to come off to the motors. So go ahead and sort of do this in the beginning when you're getting everything set up to route over to your PDB. Tape everything down, mock it up, and then start soldering on your ESC wires to the positive and negative terminals. So you've got positive on this side, negative on this side. Same thing down on the back side, we have negative over here, positive here. So we can start to solder these wires in. But before we do the soldering on these wires, we're going to bring them up and over, and we're going to trim them just a little ways past the pad, and then we're going to solder it down. So let's go ahead now, let's start trimming some of these wires, and we'll solder it to the PDB. Okay, so we did all of our soldering for our ESCs. We have the rear ESCs going to the rear positive and negative panels, and we have the front ESCs going to the front panels there. On the back, we also have the battery cable going to the positive and negative here, so we space things out a little more on the back side. We don't want those too close together in the center. Just wanted to space them out a little bit there. Give ample room in between your ESC wires and your battery cable too, so you don't get any super high voltage right next to your ESC wire powering your ESC. So everything looks good here. We have snipped everything off as close as we can get. We don't want to have too many wires hanging out on this frame too close to any edge, so anything can grab it when we're probably crashing at some point, I'm sure. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the flight controller and mount that over top of the PDB, and we will attach the signal wires next to the flight controller itself. So one thing you want to do for all your connections on here is you want to take some liquid tape. This stuff is great for covering up. Let's see if we can get this in here. We're going to cover up, we'll take a small paintbrush, and we're going to cover up some of these terminals so that we don't have any moisture or anything getting directly on our contact tabs for our PDB. So we'll do that next. Okay, so we soldered on the signal wires to the input pads on the flight controller, and you can see they're labeled here 1, 2, 3, 4. Each wire is going out to each ESC for the number that corresponds to each signal tab. So number 1 up front, number 2 back here in the rear on the left, 3 up front, 4 in the rear. So I'm going to take this off now and show you how much space we have underneath. We do have a little bit of space under there to work with. So you can see the signal wires came up through the bottom, and we soldered on them on the front there. And this is going to work great, so it'll be a nice clean build. So the next thing you want to do is you want to power your flight controller, and you want to take 2 wires and solder those to the PDB where the 5-volt comes off of this Atlas PDB. So you have positive here and negative here. We soldered both sides on here, and now it comes up and to the flight controller. You'll see it. I don't know if you can see this on camera. Positive and negative here. So look for that, and that's how you're going to power up your flight controller. Okay guys, so there's our camera cable, and we'll come really close here so you can see what's going on here and how we soldered this in, soldered it to the board. The yellow one on the very far left, that's your signal wire. The next one over is going to be the red wire, which is your positive wire, and your black wire. So it is labeled on the PDB. I'm not sure if you can see this here, but it is labeled positive and negative here, and you'll see an S here for your signal wire. So very simply, just solder those on and you're ready to go for your camera. Okay, so I went ahead and neatly tucked the wires in underneath the board and kind of routed my camera wire out the front along the inside of this outside standoff here, so it's not sticking out on the outside of the frame. If we have any crashes and stuff, you want less wire sticking out as possible for sure. So try to tuck in some of those wires as neatly as possibly underneath the board to hide them from damage, in case you do, and you will crash at some point. So I just have this little screw on here so that we can kind of hold it in place while I show you how everything looks. So far, so good. Now I'm moving on to the next step. Okay guys, now we've wired in the cable for the VTX, and over here on the left, on the bottom of your screen, I'll use a pointer tool here. I'll show you guys. There's two little jumpers here for 5-volt and 12-volt. And down here you have a no OSD jumper. So go ahead and connect those. If you don't have OSD for right away, you can go ahead and make that so that it will actually power up where you're plugging your VTX into. If you don't do that, you might not get power there. So the next thing we did is also we attached the positive and negative leads to our VTX over here on the flight controller, on the PDB, so that we can get power coming off the board to the VTX. So more wires, getting a little bit thicker, but we're going to make it nice and neat. Okay, so now we're at a good point. We can test out the VTX system and the camera, and I'll go ahead and grab my goggles and make sure that things are working. So I'm going to plug things in, and then I'm going to power up the quad, and hopefully no white smoke comes puffing out of any certain part of the quad. Go ahead and plug in the VTX over here. Whichever one you choose, whichever one you're using, go ahead and plug that in. I can't see. There we go. Okay. We've got this running up through here. It's because we're going to surface mount the antenna here. And we have a Video Aerial Systems antenna. Before you turn anything on or plug any batteries into your system, make sure that your antenna's on your setup. So now we can go ahead, plug the battery in. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my Fat Sharks real quick. Okay. Now we can plug in the battery, check the video system. Okay. No white smoke, we're good. Let's check the goggles. Perfect, the video came up and we're good to go. Okay guys, the next thing you want to do is go ahead and take your heat shrink, put it over top of your ESCs, and leave the edges out so you can go ahead and solder your motors on. And we're gonna go ahead and snip these wires off short enough so that they reach, but not too long, not too short. So make sure you just measure them to just a little bit past where the tabs are for soldering on to your ESC. So now we'll go ahead and get started doing that. After we do that, we'll go ahead and put the screws in through the motors and we'll go ahead and heat shrink down to the ESC after that. If you do have clear heat shrink for your ESCs, that does look really nice. If you don't, black is just fine, makes no difference. Okay, so we have the motors all soldered up, and we're ready to plug in the receiver. Now I can choose which one I'm going to use. I was going to use the D4R2, and that is 8-channel capable, and when we're using the jumper, that we don't have to use with the X4R, because this one is actually 16 channels, so we have lots more channels. So we're going to run that on S-Bus. We don't need the jumper on this one, so we can take the D4R2, put it to the side. This one's been pretty popular for the last year or two, but now this one is kind of taking over because the D4R2 is actually analog and this is a digital one. So this is a little faster response rate at 5 milliseconds, and the other one is 27. So D4R2, little slower response rate on that. So we're going to go with the X4R for this build. I probably won't notice it because I'm probably not that good of a pilot, but you know, it's always nice to upgrade. So I would recommend using one of these if you can get a hold of one. So I'm going to go ahead now and plug it into the flight controller. You want to make sure that your pins are lined up. And like I said, we don't have to use the jumper. It did come with some jumpers, but we're not going to use that. And then what we'll do is we'll bind this up with the Tyrannus, and I'll make sure that I select 16. When you bind it up, go ahead and select 16 channels and set that up in your radio. So you'll probably notice that I didn't shrink down the heat shrink yet, mainly because I want to leave those open for when I do the motor testing. I want to make sure that all these motors are spinning the right direction for the quad to fly properly. So if one motor is spinning the wrong direction, the quad's just going to flip over. So a common new mistake if you're just doing your first build is that you have one motor spinning the wrong direction. The way to fix that is switch 2 of these wires around. That's the manual way to do it. The new way to do it is with the BLHeli software that you can hook up to your quad, and you can go into the BLHeli software and change that around. So there's 2 ways to reverse a motor direction easily nowadays with the software, or you can do it the old school way and just switch 2 wires and then go ahead and shrink your heat shrink down and you're good to go. Now you can go ahead and grab the adhesive pads that came with your QAV-R kit, and you could be really anal and just clean this off with a little alcohol and prep it up before you stick this down, but the adhesive that comes on these are really strong, so you really don't need to do that. I would just go ahead and peel them and stick them down probably about halfway along between the arm bolt there and the motor bolts. And you can kind of eyeball it, get it right in the center of the arm and press down, and that is not coming off. And if they do, they're relatively cheap to replace. Just makes it really feel nice when you set it down on the bench and you're working on it. This is a nice touch to the QAV-R. Couple more here. And they don't have to be perfectly lined up. You don't have to get super crazy and do any measuring or anything. Some people might, but not me. I'm just going to stick them on there. There we go. So now, flip it over on the bench. Ooh, nice. Feels good. So, just get you up a little higher off the ground. when you go to do your first launches and landings. Okay, now we're getting to the fun part. We get to work with the hardware. So I have my hardware in this little magnetic tray. These are really great, by the way. If you don't have one yet, if you're just getting started in building these, stop by Harbor Freight, grab one of these for $2 or $3. It just keeps things really neat on the bench while you're doing your build. So the front of this frame is easy to notice. Here I'm holding it up so you can see that there's slots on the side. This is where your camera walls are going to go. They're going to slide right down in those slots. Like that, and you're going to put the post in first, so we're going to work on the hardware on the post. I have the post over here to the side. These are metal posts, by the way, and you can use Loctite on them if you want to. I typically try to go over my quad with a hex driver every once in a while just to check screws that make sure that bolts are properly tightened, because I don't know how many times I've been out the field and noticed that a screw had come out the bottom of the frame or I lost one. With these are kind of nice because they are metal. Lumenier did make these metal, and you can Loctite them, so it should hold those bolts in place, which is really nice, because there's a lot of vibration on these when you're flying them. I'm not going to hook up the VTX or the camera right now, because I don't want to have those kind of just dangling there while I'm working on the hardware. So I'm going to go ahead and set the VTX and the camera and the top plate to the side for right now. I'm going to grab my hex and start putting on some of these posts. Okay, it's really starting to look like something now. I have the post mounted on here, and now I'm trying to figure out what my layout's going to be for my top plate. I think I'm going to have my VTX sitting back here near the rear, not too far back, because I don't want this cable sticking out off the end. You don't want anything too close to the edges on your frame, because you don't want things sticking out when you crash, so that things can be easily ripped off. The next thing that's going to go on the bottom plate is my receiver. That'll probably go right behind the VTX. You want to make sure that things have a lot of room under here and they're not touching. You don't want any plastic parts touching this VTX metal connector, because it gets super hot. So if you can have this part hanging where there is possibly right over top of where there is a hole in the frame, that's good, because you're not going to burn the carbon. I have seen things get extremely hot on these VTXs and actually burn the carbon frame. So some people will take a little a VHB and stick underneath here, just give it a little height off the bottom of the frame. And we'll do that later, and then we'll put a zip tie around this so that it's secure in place. So now I'll go ahead and take a few minutes and I'll figure out how to get stuff situated. And then we're going to put some heat shrink and some zip ties on our antennas. We'll have those running out the side of the frame here. So it'll be a vertical antenna. I'm going to do that one. It's just a little easier for me. It's like the way I like to do it. So it'll be sticking off the top. And I'll take a few minutes to show you that. So now I'm going to go ahead and get this VTX secured. So now I took some of that 3M VHB, I put it on the back of the VTX, and I made sure that the button was down and accessible from the side. And what I'm going to do is now I'm going to take a zip tie, and they have holes through here on the top plate. You can see exactly for your zip tie, so they thought about the placement of everything before we started building these, just to make it a little easier on you guys. So you can go ahead and put your zip tie through there. And I'm going to leave a little bit of slack because I don't want my VTX cable too tight in there. And you can snip off that last piece there. You can bring this VTX cable over to the side maybe. Have it off to the side. You don't really ever want to zip tie things too tight over top of these circuit boards, because you don't want to damage any of the components on there. Just go ahead and snip that off. And our VTX is pretty solid right now. And I tightened up these bolts back here. Make sure you go ahead and do that once you've mounted yours on the surface mount. And now I'll go ahead and put the receiver on next. Okay guys, so I have my top plate, I have secured the antenna, I have the VTX on there, and now I have the receiver zip tied down. I didn't use any VHB underneath this because I might want to take it off later. I ran the antennas up through this top slot here, and we're going to do some zip tie on there and some heat shrink later. But what I wanted to show you really quickly is you don't want to have any of this metal from this VTX touching. You don't normally want to have it touching the frame because it gets super hot, and you don't want to have it touching any part of your receiver, so you want to have plenty of clearance in here between the two, so it's not touching the frame or the receiver or any other components. You want to have plenty of room, and you definitely don't want to have any metal to metal connections in there, so you risk shorting something out. Try to do that on your entire frame, that you don't have any short circuits, and like your flight controller touching another piece of metal while it's on will instantly fry your VTX or your flight controller. So seen a lot of people do that just working on the bench. So everything looks pretty good here. Another thing I wanted to show you is that I have this bind button on the X4R. It is exposed up here so I can get to it when I'm ready to bind up my Tyrannus. That's going to be nice and convenient right there. And now the next thing, I just need to figure out how I'm going to put the camera on the front, and we'll do some antenna supports up here, so the antennas will be hanging off like this off the top. And I wanted to tell you that there are a couple different ways to mount your antennas on here. You can do this hard mount, surface mount on here, like we've done with this VTX cable. Another way to do that is have the VTX down here on this bottom part, and you can have the antenna actually hanging off the back. Some pilots, and you know, it could be that you have a video signal loss if the antenna is facing this direction. You will get a better video signal if it's sitting straight up and down. However, my experience is I have had these break quite easily hanging off the top like this. So I'm going to take a chance at this setup first. If this gets torn all to hell, I'll probably just take it off and put it down bottom and have one hanging off the back. Seems to be kind of the trend right now. A lot of guys are doing that. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'll do some heat shrink on these next. Okay, so now I have one zip tie on this rail on the right hand side of the frame, and what you're going to do is you're going to take your antenna and run it up along the inside of the zip tie all the way to the top, and then you're going to put some heat shrink over top of both of these together and just lightly heat shrink it down. And you can kind of trim it to fit and eyeball it before you heat shrink it down where you want it. You might have a little antenna sticking out the top, but these are 5-inch zip ties and they're just about perfect, and leave a little bit of slack underneath the frame so stuff's not super tight, but you don't want stuff hanging out on the edge of your frame to catch on tree branches and things when you're crashing. So this looks pretty good so far. I'll just go ahead and add this other zip tie and some heat shrink, and we'll start getting stuff proper. Okay, so I have some 1/4-inch heat shrink over top of the antenna now and the zip tie, and I'm just going to go ahead and take my torch and heat that up until it shrinks around it. Not going to do it too super tight, but just so it's nice and snug on the zip tie. We'll do both sides there. It's looking good. Okay, we'll do this other side. It's not going to hurt the antenna. Just go ahead and tighten that right up. Okay, you start to see it smoke a little bit, back off because you're burning it. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now we can move on to the next step. Go ahead and get your camera and your sidewall plate. Go ahead and put the first screw through on this side. I did mine in the middle hole here. You can put it all the way back if you want, or all the way forward. I figured the middle spot would probably be good. So I'll angle this up just slightly later. I'll get that situated. I'm not going to over tighten these screws at first, just because I don't want to have issues later or strip this inside the camera, this threading. So we'll go ahead and take this next screw, put this in, straighten that up. This provides great protection for the camera when you do crash. So this is nice and contained inside here. Now the next step we're going to do is we're going to take this lens off. Go ahead and remove this by turning it to the left. Try not to move that collar too much. You're going to use that collar later to tighten it down on this piece. So go ahead and put your front piece of the frame on there. It's also adding a little more protection for your camera in a crash. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And it does have an angle on this front plate. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set this in the frame. I can plug this into the back of the camera now. Camera cable. Okay, I can set this down. It's going to be nice and snug in between these posts. Make sure you get the sidewalls into the slots on the bottom of the frame. And the front plate as well. Everything should snap into place. So you can go ahead and take your top plate when you get done with that and put your top plate on, start fastening that down and make sure that all your tabs line up when you do that. Okay, so I have the sidewalls on the frame now. I have the top plate on and I have 4 screws here just loosely on. Go ahead and take a moment to tighten those down so that the tabs go through the top plate. Make sure that they do indeed line up, top and bottom. Now what I had to do on mine is I had to, you can see this here up close, I had to put this screw on that very back spot, the very back hole there, and in order for it to work right with this plate I'm using on the front. Some people might not use this plate. You don't have to if you don't want to, and so you can get more of a degree of pitch on your camera angle. You can go all the way up to 45 or however high you want if you're doing freestyle. If you're doing racing, you generally don't have to go that high because you're not trying to do tree flips and things. So this is looking pretty good, and I just want to make sure those are nice and snug. And look on the bottom too, just make sure those tabs line up on the bottom of your frame. So everything looks good here. Just going to double check that these screws, these bolts are as tight as the ones on top. Okay, those all look good. Now there's 2 final screws in the very back of the frame near your antenna. I have one sticking in there. Go ahead and pop another one in there. You can tighten those down. And after we do that, go ahead and take your battery connector for your XT60 and put it in the slot here on the back side of the frame. However, which way you like this to be facing is totally up to you. That's nice. I want to push it down just a little bit so it's a little more flush with the surface. That looks pretty good. So now I can come in here and I can clean up some of these cables on the bottom, and I will go ahead and plug in the VTX and the receiver as well. Okay guys, that's it. That's the build video for the QAV-R 180. This is the 4-inch edition, and remember there are 5 and 6-inch arms available, so if you want to have this one a little larger, a little different style flyer, you can do that. I did the 4-inch because we're probably going to put some tri-props on here or some quads and do some racing with this one. Maybe some mild freestyle with it. I'm sure it's super durable for freestyle and racing. It is a very compact frame, and everything on this frame is super clean, especially with this pinless build we have going on the flight controller. Not a lot of stuff sticking up off the top of the board, and plenty of room in there and space when we want to add, you know, an OSD in here or some extra components. I feel like it has plenty of room inside this frame. Nice that it has holes here in the top part, so you can put your VTX up top and do a surface mount here, or you have holes in the bottom for zip tying your VTX to the bottom, and you can have your antenna hanging out the back. Whichever way you like to do it, they thought of, which is very, very nice. Put whatever size motors on here you want, and we did the 1806s. Feel free to change up and put whatever flight controller you want, or you can go along with the build video in the description down below. There's all the parts and pieces where you can set yours up. But hopefully if you're at this point in your build and you watched our video and you made some progress on your build and this helped you, I hope that's I mean, that's the #1 goal of this video. So please comment if this did help you out with your build. It's an exceptional quad for this year. Lumenier, in my opinion, is top industry stuff, so you can't get much better than Lumenier gear. Very, very nice stuff. So their cameras, their ESCs, their motors are all great. You know, like I said, put whatever antenna you want on here, you know, TBS, Triumph, or you know, your video aerial systems, whichever one you prefer. So both are outstanding antennas. So thanks again for hanging out and watching this build video. Hopefully this inspires you to build one of these. I look forward to flying it in the field and in the urban areas that we like to take these. So I'll see you on the street. I'm Justin Davis. Please click subscribe.